Hello, listeners, or on YouTube, viewers. Welcome to Trek in Time. This is the podcast that takes a look at Star Trek in order and in history. We're taking a look at each episode of Star Trek in chronological order, so we're still very early days. We're in Enterprise, and we're also going to take a look at how things were in the world at the time of the original broadcasts. So since we're in Enterprise, we're also in the year 2002 at this point. We'll take a deeper dive into each episode and take a deeper dive sometimes into the eras in which the broadcast happened. We'll basically follow whatever catches our interest. And now you're wondering who's this magical hour that I'm talking about? Who is the us here? It's me, Sean Farrell. You know me. I'm a writer. I write some books that are some sci-fi, and I write some books that are some picture books, and I write some books that are a little weird. And with me is my brother. He's Matthew Farrell. He's the tech guru and inquisitor behind the YouTube channel Undecided with Matt Farrell, which takes a look at emerging tech and its impact on our lives. Before we get into this episode, just a reminder, there are ways to directly support the podcast. You can, of course, keep doing what you're doing right now, which is listening to us as we drone on and on and on. Or you can go to trekintime.show. Just ignore us completely, but give us the monies. Either way, we appreciate your time and your support. Matt, how are you?
I'm very good. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Before we get into the episode, I think Matt has some listener comments from our recent episodes. Matt, do you want to share those thoughts with us?
Sure. We had a couple comments that were on a theme from the last episode, which was called Acquisition, which is the Ferengi episode where the Ferengi kind of hijack the ship. Hail Ghost 69 said, while this episode fell flat for me, I love that the cast was a bunch of actors we've seen before. I didn't even recognize Jeffrey Combs until I watched it for the third time and saw him in the credits. It's always nice to see Ethan Phillips, too. And in the broader picture, the retcon was from the timey-wimey stuff, making it possible for them to meet. Then Robotrav said something along the same lines of, I loved seeing some of my favorite Trek actors playing the Ferengi. That's one of my favorite things about rewatching all of the old series. It's so much fun figuring out that Klingon in season 6 was also the Romulan in season 3. And I agree with that. There is some fun in that. There's a little bit of a stunt casting sometimes. And I think you and I were talking in that episode about it was almost a little too much stunt casting because it was just every Ferengi was just jam-packed.
Yeah.
It's like you could have picked one, maybe two, but they did all of them were pretty much a stunt cast.
It was like all of that with Clint Howard on top was just like, okay, Clint Howard on top of all of that is maybe one too many. They couldn't have held on to Clint a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I agree with all of that. I think that it is a lot of fun to have that. In this episode, I think we're going to hit a discussion around that very thing with some of the casting of this episode. So Matt, do you want to give us a quick synopsis about this episode?
Sure. It's Captain Archer and Ensign Mayweather are detained by the Tandarans in a Suliban internment camp. And learning of the Suliban's persecution by the Tandarans, Archer enlists the aid of the Enterprise and his crew to free them.
That's right. This episode is, of course, the episode Detained. It's directed by David Livingstone, who's done a couple of episodes prior to this, including Shuttlepod 1, which was one that Matt and I had differing opinions on, but I don't have a problem with him as a director. I had a problem with effectively the writing of that episode. But the directing was clearly top-notch. So we're in good hands with David in this one. This is another one where the story is by Brannon and Braga, and the teleplay is by Mike Sussman and Phyllis Strong. Sussman and Strong have, of course, written other episodes this season already. This episode aired on April 24th, 2002, which did throw me off a bit. We've barely been back from the winter hiatus, and then they took another break. The previous episode was early April, so here we are, April 24th. They took about 3 weeks off in showing new episodes. So as I was going through and compiling what was the world that this landed in, I was thrown by the fact that suddenly I was skipping over previous weeks. And I think that that's also reflected in the viewers that this episode had. This episode only had 4.88 million viewers. That's a steep drop, almost 1 million people from the previous new episode. It seems like not only do we have the exhaustion of let's be honest, a string of kind of low B grade, high C grade, maybe episodes for several weeks, followed by reruns for 3 weeks. They're slowly shedding their audience. 4.8 million viewers is not good for a show that costs this much money to make. So when this episode aired was on April 24th, 2002. And what was going on in the world at that time? Well, we were all dancing our fannies off to the song Ain't It Funny by J-Lo and Ja Rule. This is their second time, not together. Each of them has had a number one hit previously during our run of Enterprise. And the number one movie in the box office was The Scorpion King, which, of course, is the 2002 sword and sorcery action-adventure film directed by Chuck Russell, starring Dwayne Johnson. It is Dwayne Johnson doing effectively a prequel to the Mummy franchise, in which he was the Scorpion King in those films. But this is his first turn at being the lead in the movie. And as, of course, we all know, it didn't work out too well for Dwayne Johnson.
No, he went nowhere.
No. I wonder whatever happened to him.
Yeah, never heard from him again.
He fell like a rock, one might say. The movie made $36 million, which put it as a record breaker ahead of The Matrix for box office draw in April, which I thought was an interesting. The Scorpion King is currently available on HBO, but it is a movie that, one, I have never seen.
Yeah.
And two, whenever I see it in rotation on things like HBO, I'm always like, oh yeah, that's a thing that exists. So, and the number one show this week was, once again, ER. We're in a cycle at this point in the season where the top shows are going to very often either be ER or CSI. Those two shows appear to be 2002's top two shows combating for that number one spot week after week. And this week it was ER with 23 million viewers. In the New York Times on the day that this aired, two major headlines. One of them, the Pakistanis say the U.S. is allowed in the border areas. This, of course, is the ongoing search for members of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and the U.S. desiring to go into Pakistan, which borders Afghanistan, to find those fighters that fled across the border. And also the major headline, scandals in the church, the overview of the Pope offering apology to victims of sex abuse by priests. And this, of course, is a major story that has gone on for literally decades now, as the repercussions of that kind of sex abuse continue to be not only investigated, but in some cases not defended, but the church has not fully embraced ownership of responsibility for what it did in allowing some of those priests to continue to work with children. So on to our current episode, Detained. This episode, we are speculating, takes place sometime in January of 2152. This, of course, as I mentioned previously, is based completely on speculation. This is, we have an episode with a date, and then we have a bunch of episodes without dates, and then the future episode with the date is February 2152. So based on just how many episodes we had, I said, you know what, I'm going to say that's taking place in January. So Happy New Year to the crew of the Enterprise as the episode opens with Archer and Mayweather caught in a Tandaran prison. And Matt, you and I have talked previously, basically every time Mayweather ends up in an episode, we talk about how much we like him and how underutilized he is as an overall character. There are times where Enterprise feels like it maybe has one major crew member too many.
Yes.
It is always leaving somebody out in a way that feels unfortunate. There is Sato, who it would be nice to know more about her. She's relegated to a couple of episodes. There's Mayweather. He's relegated to a couple of episodes. Trip usually gets airtime, understandably. He's supposed to be an old friend of Archer's. Yep. And he's supposed to be that person that Archer can turn to as a sounding board for some of his biggest quandaries. T'Pol, of course, is going to be a major character and in almost every episode because she is the second in command and also as the one major person on the bridge crew who is not human is going to get attention as
Yep.
Star Trek likes to build a crew that has that kind of diversity in it right there on the bridge. And Phlox is another one where he gets more play. I do wish there was more time spent with him and what his culture and his approach to humanity is. But like Neelix in Voyager, he's kind of relegated to one room. When people want to go talk to him, he gets his airtime. But if they don't go down there, he doesn't really show up too much.
It's a Guinan.
Yeah. So having Mayweather in this episode was a nice touch. I appreciated that he was the one in this prison with Archer, and it's an opportunity to show him having what I think are some really strong dramatic and heroic moments for him as a character, because
it also makes a lot of sense because it's him and the captain that were captured from a shuttle. He would have been piloting the shuttle.
He was piloting the shuttle.
Very different from like, why is Trip here? Why would Trip go on this mission? It's like, no, you have Mayweather and it makes perfect sense.
So the two of them wake up in a prison. I really like how this one hits the ground running. We don't see the opening sequence is not them flying in the shuttle and getting attacked. It is not them being captured. It is just has a sort of Twilight Zone element to it. They wake up, they're in a prison. The door is not locked. They're able to see Suliban in the hallway. And their response immediately is like, we're in a bad situation, but we really don't understand it. And I think that element really does a good job for the episode of starting off with making the viewer uncertain about exactly what is going on. Why are they captured, but the door isn't locked? What is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
They are soon approached by clearly an officer in charge who turns out to be Major Clev, who takes them to meet Colonel Grat. And this is where we're going to have our first moment of talking about stunt casting in this episode. Yes. Not truly stunt casting, although it is, but it's not because it's so good.
Yes.
It's Dean Stockwell. And this is one of my, I'm going to hit my deeper dive on this episode right now. Just like them hitting the ground running, I'm going to hit my deeper dive right now. I'm going to talk about Dean Stockwell, who was a tremendous actor. He was in a lot of things. I just happened to recently, I'm doing I can't call it a rewatch. I'm doing a watch through of Columbo, which is a favorite of Matt's.
Oh my God.
Going back for Columbo. Decades. And for decades, Matt and I have always traded off on, I'm the Rockford Files guy and he's the Columbo guy. Both of us had that 70s show thing that we would return to as background viewing, just voices in the background that make us feel calm, make us feel like we can handle things. Everything's going to be okay because Columbo
blanket.
or Jim Rockford are taking care of things. And I'm just now going through a watch through of Columbo for the first time and watching an episode recently in which a young Dean Stockwell plays the murder victim. And when he showed up, I was immediately just like, it's Dean Stockwell. And my girlfriend was like, who's Dean Stockwell? I was like, what do you mean, who's Dean Stockwell? Dean Stockwell,
Dune.
among all the different films and TV shows he's been in, is most recognizable to some people as Scott Bakula's partner from Quantum Leap. So this is an opportunity for the two of them to work together. And whenever you have this kind of casting, obviously there's a stunt element to it, but you got to get it right. You got to get the opportunity has to be not just, well, let's put them in there together because it'll be fun. It has to make sense. And the dynamic here does two things. The role that Dean Stockwell is playing is really the challenger to Captain Archer in the episode. So it gives the two of them an opportunity not to recreate what happened on Quantum Leap, but to go completely against that archetype. They are not buddies here. They are playing a chess match against each other, trying to outsmart the other one. One of them has all the leverage, he thinks, and is using it to his advantage, while the other one is trying to figure out, how do I get out from underneath this guy's thumb? As opposed to the best friends relationship that was portrayed in Quantum Leap. And if anybody remembers Quantum Leap ends on an incredible leaping off into a future for Scott Bakula's character, who effectively changes the past, which guarantees he will be trapped in the leaping, and the past that he changes is that of the character of Dean Stockwell. So that show really ends on a note of the love and friendship between these two characters. This episode, completely the opposite of that. This is cold, dry, manipulative prison superintendent against a prisoner who has zero control of the situation. And when this was first suggested, it was suggested by Scott Bakula, who very early on suggested that Stockwell should appear on the show, saying, wouldn't it be great if we could do that? And they took their time to really find the right scenario. And Bakula said of doing this, that they would love to do an episode together, but they would have to be clever about it or just ignore doing it entirely so that it wouldn't be a distraction, but add to the show. And I think that is really, they managed to do that. In the meantime, Stockwell apparently did not actively pursue getting a role in the series. He waited and just to see what would happen. But he did have one requirement, that was that he didn't want a lot of prosthetic makeup. So I thought that was great, which could explain why the aliens in this basically just have little pinched noses. That's all. That's all that's going on here.
Little thing right up there.
Little tiny things on their noses. So they're taken to meet the Colonel, and one of the things I really like about this episode is the drip, drip, drip of the turning of the screws. They get tightened very slowly. And the first meeting is clearly not terrific as far as a first contact situation goes. No.
But it doesn't seem too bad, though.
It doesn't seem too bad.
They're going to get out of this. No big
it's
deal.
like, sure, you're in prison, but we're going to take you to see a judge. That's going to be in 3 days. I will do my part in explaining to the judge how you ended up here. So I'm not too worried for you, and I think you're going to be okay. You just got to wait these 3 days, and then we'll get you to that judge. How does that sound to you? No, I'm sorry, you can't talk to your crew. And leaves with Archer and Mayweather nonplussed, but they're okay. Because at this point, they, of course, are assuming they're in a prison. They don't see this as anything other than a prison, probably full of bad people, right?
Yes, because the Suliban are walking around everywhere.
Right. And so the Suliban are walking around everywhere, and that is clearly tainting their approach to where they think they are. And they're given the advice of stay to yourselves. Don't socialize too much with any of the people around you. So they're trying to do that a little bit, but they end up crossing paths occasionally. Meanwhile, the Enterprise is contacted by Grat, who says the same thing to them. Like, we've got your people. They are safe. We're going to take them in front of a magistrate. It's going to be best if you just stay and wait and don't try and do too much to get them back right now, because trust me, it's going to look better for them if you guys are patient and let the legal system. There's constant refrains of let the legal system take its course.
Yep.
And the one person on the Enterprise who's like, okay, we'll stand by, is T'Pol. Trip is very quick to say, like, let's get in there, let's rescue these guys. And T'Pol makes the argument of there is a system in place, and I think that this is a very interesting tension in the show, and I want to hear what you have to say about that. The tension being, T'Pol says, you're going to have to get used to, if you're going to be going out into space, you're going to have to get used to actually honoring other people's cultures as you cross paths with them.
Yep.
And there was a real strong tension there, because what we will find out is that this is not so much a prison as much as an internment camp. This is pulling, I think, for me, this is pulling two threads at once. One thread is hearkening back to World War II, the Japanese internment camps, where Japanese Americans were rounded up and put into camps, quote, for their own protection and to ensure national security. But these were people who had done nothing wrong. They were not in trouble in any way, shape, or form with the legal system prior to this. Their goods and services, their homes were taken from them, and they were put into these camps, and it affected them for the rest of their lives. Two stories related to this that I wanted to remind our viewers of. One is that the gentleman who played Sulu in
George Takei
in the original series, He spent several years of his childhood in one of these camps. He lived this. And another story I wanted to share was that of somebody I came across just recently. There was a white American farmer who ended up helping 4 of his neighbors who were Japanese Americans. It was in California. He took care of their farms for them while they were in the camps. And when they came out, their camps were still, their farms were still working. And he was paying not only for maintaining their farms, he was paying the mortgages for them from the proceeds of what he was growing. And he died at the age of 103. He ended up being honored recently, and I will include information on that in the show notes if anybody's interested in looking into that.
Yeah, I had no idea. The whole theme of this episode, which the writer, I found a quote from the writer of this episode, was his name Sussman.
Yeah.
He hates message episodes of Star Trek. He always hates them, and hated this. And he was not happy with how this episode turned out because it was very preachy. My response to him was, well, then you're not doing it right. You can have message episodes that are really good. And there's plenty of examples from the original series and other series that do it extremely well. And if the fact that you're going into this tainted and thinking these kind of things are crap, you're going to probably write crap. And I don't think he did a bad job, but it was a little on the nose at times. I thought he could have been a little more subtle. The one thing about this is I think this is the first episode that you and I are talking about that ties back to one of the reasons why we talk about this time in history, what was going on in the world.
I was going to say this was the second thread that I think is being pulled. Yes.
This is the first time that we're talking about an episode where you can actually see the ramifications of what happened in September 11th. And this was a direct response to that, because at this time we were like the anti-Muslim rhetoric had gone to an incredible level. Yes. Attacks on Muslims had increased like 500%. People were being rounded up around the world and being detained without due process. Mm-hmm. It was a really horrible time to be a Muslim. And this was a direct response to that, because you'd think we would have learned our lesson from World War II and the Japanese internment camps. Here we are starting to do something kind of frighteningly similar at the time, and Star Trek is grappling with that. Yes. And that's what this episode was all about. So for me, it's like I remember watching this at the time, and it was like a punch straight to your face. It was so obvious what they were talking about. Right. And rewatching it again, I just watched it yesterday. It just like came flooding back of like, oh yeah, I remembered at the time this was like really prevalent. So I didn't think it was too ham-fisted in the way it presented it. I thought they actually did a pretty good job with the message, especially because it was tying it back to World War II. It wasn't directly talking about 9/11 at all or anything like that. Yeah. So I thought it did a pretty good job, and I thought the setup of the episode, like you just ran through, I thought was excellent. With the Dean Stockwell's character. The one thing I thought was kind of like the ham-fisted moments in the show were what we talked about, where they are going back into the general population of the Suliban. And what does Archer do? He goes up to a father with his son, who's like getting bathed or something. And he goes up to him. He's like, a little young, isn't he, to be in the cabal? And it was like, what are you doing? He would have been a little more subtle. He should have gone up and like started asking probing questions, because he thinks that it's like absurd that this kid is part of the cabal. And he could have been a little more subtle in how he went about it. But instead he comes up like a belligerent jerk. And that just seemed so on the nose, a little too just like, oh, come on. You could have been more subtle about it.
I think I agree with you. I think that it's literally on a sentence level that I have problems with particular moments. Yes. It's not about thematic or how the episode is structured. I think this is, as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the stronger episodes that we've done in the season. I think that it is interesting that in the notes I was able to find about this episode, the reception at the time was lukewarm, but that as time has moved forward, this episode has come back again and again and included in lists of must-view watching for Star Trek. Mm-hmm. I think that this is really the moment for me where it looks like Archer is stepping into that role of on par with a Kirk or a Picard, stepping into a scenario which is ethically and morally so complicated that that moment of divorcing I have this desire to let cultures alone and respect them, yet there's a thing that's happening here which is egregious, all wrapped in a message for the viewer that is handled in a way that I think is done with a lot of subtlety and nuance.
I agree.
It is obvious that what they're talking about is Japanese internment camps, potential Muslim sequestering, the attacks on Muslim post 9/11. But this is where Star Trek has its truest voice, I think, is when it is talking about the world we live in, as opposed to trying to divorce itself entirely from commentary of that kind. That is the best place for this kind of sci-fi writing, is to be talking about the people who are living and watching it, as opposed to making itself entirely about some sort of fictional world that is self-reflective. And so for me, this episode stands up as like truly Star Trek. This is very Trek.
I agree. And the other thing to mention is, like, we've been talking about two tentpole things that happened in history that influenced this episode. But this is something that's happened in human history over and over and over again. So this is a very strong theme to grab onto for an episode. So that's part of why I don't agree with Sussman's take of message episodes are just crap. It's like, no, you can do it well, and you kind of did this one pretty well, ham-fisted in a couple parts, but on a whole, I thought it was a very good episode.
I also really like how this is an opportunity for them to be looking at the Suliban as something other than a problem.
Yes.
And investigating the Suliban as a people, as sort of, you're getting hints of what the Cabal might be responding to. You get a bigger picture of what the Suliban as a people are about. And this is the first time in many episodes of Enterprise where they didn't reuse a favorite alien in this role of like, this isn't a group of Klingons, this isn't a group of Ferengi, or a new alien hasn't been thrown in for 1 week and then disappears forever. By bringing in the Suliban, who have been the recurring villain of number of episodes, and the moment you get any sort of cultural history, it suddenly feels like, oh, finally.
Yes.
And in this one, the Suliban that they befriend reveals that the Suliban homeworld was destroyed hundreds of years earlier. And so the Suliban have largely become nomadic people. So the members of the Cabal, and this is not my attempt to excuse what they are doing, but the members of the Cabal are a people who are looking for some kind of foothold and power in a scenario where they have none.
Yes.
Meanwhile, these other Suliban, who have effectively been refugees across this quadrant of the galaxy, have found homes on various planets where they have settled in. And this particular Suliban says, not only did I live on that planet, I was born on that planet. He had a job as a chief engineer in a research facility on that planet. When things started to go bad because of the Cabal, he and his family were rounded up as a result of that, not because of anything that they had done, but because of what they were by birth. And seeing that depicted for the Suliban was very, very interesting. It brings them really into it feels like this is the first time that the Suliban became a Trek race.
Yes. It was,
as opposed to being a bunch of people in costumes playing bad guys.
As viewers, it's like we've been thirsty for more information about the Suliban, and this is the first time we got some depth to their society and why they may be the way they are. Yes. It's like they should have done this weeks earlier.
Yes. And then this is also one of the first times where there's a meeting between after Archer has befriended the Suliban named Danik, and Danik is the one filling him in on, like, we're a people who care for our families. We are hardworking. We try to integrate ourselves into various planets where we've ended up. And then through no acts of our own, we've ended up in these detention camps. And it's after all of that Archer now has a different perspective. And then he's pulled back into Colonel Gratt's office, and Gratt begins to question him along the lines of, and this is the first time this is happening in the season. Here we are, episode, what are we on, 21? Finally, somebody is looking back at the overall season and saying, in Gratt's conversation. Why did you deal with the Suliban when the Broken Bow storyline, the pilot, took place? Why did you not tell me anything that you knew about the Suliban's involvement in the Temporal Cold War? What did you know when you crossed paths with them? Basically, cherry picking from Archer's own history, and it raises some interesting questions. How is he getting this information?
Yes.
What are they doing? How are they gaining access to this information? Have they done something with the Enterprise where they've actually been able to hack records and be able to find this information? Grat is looking at all of this as potential evidence of, it's very subtly hinted at, maybe you're in collusion with them, but you know, even if you're not in collusion, you know something. And therefore you should tell me what you know. So it's one of those, you are suddenly guilty by association. And best case scenario, you're holding secrets. Worst case scenario, you know more and are involved directly in these things, and that's why you're here. So this is now the screw is turned to the point where now it's causing some pain. Up to this point, it's been largely uncomfortable. It's been awkward. It's been, I wish we had met under different circumstances. Now suddenly it's, oh, I'm going to delay your transfer to the magistrate. You now might be here for 2 months. And you can see the handwriting on the wall. If they don't get out of this internment camp, they aren't going to leave. They're never going to be allowed. The whole thing with due process, legal process, all those arguments go completely out the window. All the while, Grat is still making the argument, this is for their protection. They are in danger if they leave this camp. They will leave and then they will be pursued and they will be hunted by other people. So it's better for them to be in this prison where we at least feed them and clothe them, as opposed to them having to flee for their lives from rabble who might be looking to, literally describing like lynching scenarios. Like they would be pursued and they would be murdered. And at this point now, Archer understands, like, none of this is going to work. And T'Pol finally understands when she has it communicated to her aboard the Enterprise, oh, there's been a problem, there's been a delay, they're going to be here for a while. This is the turning point for T'Pol, where she finally hears Trip saying, let's get going on some sort of rescue operation. And she says, basically almost like she's turning a blind eye, like, do what you needed to do. And so they managed to get a communicator in, they beam it down into the internment camp. Archer and Mayweather now have an opportunity to communicate with the Enterprise. And from this point on, the episode is largely, it's like the movie The Great Escape. It's rounding up support. There is some tension between one of the Suliban who is not interested in being involved. He sees the potential that these Earth men are actually trying to cause problems for the Suliban, and he's operating and I loved the fact that it didn't turn out to be that he was himself a member of the Cabal, but it's just a terrified Suliban. He has seen people get hurt too often.
It's a guilt by association. He looks at the humans as you're probably in cahoots with the people running the prison. It's like, and you're trying to get us in trouble. So it's like it's a suspicion all around, which is an interesting dynamic to lean into.
So because of the knowledge of Danik and the other Suliban who understand better how the camp is laid out, and there is a hangar where it turns out that Suliban vessels are being held, and that's also, it turns out, where the shuttlecraft is being held. And so they put together a plan of getting there, and they've orchestrated this with members of the Enterprise crew, which includes Trip. And this is, again, one of those interesting situations. Like, why is Trip flying this mission?
No.
Like, Trip is flying this shuttlecraft to effectively strafe and bomb parts of the camp to destroy weaponry so that the Suliban and everybody else can escape. Why is the chief engineer doing that?
We're doing an airstrike. Get the chief engineer. It's like, it's not what happens. No.
And in a nice twist, they end up beaming Reed down into the camp. And two things about this that I really liked. He's been... the doctor has changed his skin so that he looks Suliban. So you end up with the opportunity for several nice jokes, including Reed saying, "Can we get me to sick bay immediately because this is really starting to itch?"
Yeah.
And you also get the opportunity to hear Phlox, as he's working on him, without knowing what he's working on, say, "I'm not quite happy with the nose."
Yeah.
I like those two moments. You
there's
also get the nice moment of interaction with Mayweather and Archer. You want to go into that?
I love the way that Mayweather didn't recognize him at first, was ready to like beat him up, and it took him a while to recognize Reed. Is that you? And then when he runs into the captain for the first time, the captain throws him against a wall and just immediately goes, "Reed?" Like almost immediately. It's like, I like the fact that they did it two different ways for those two different characters.
Yeah, they did it two different ways. There's two different characters, and Reed's response to both of them is he's happy that he gets to tease Mayweather by saying something to him, calling him by name, and clearly with his British accent coming through, like, "Haha, I got you." And then when he meets Archer, he's disappointed that the captain so quickly has identified him. He's just like, "Damn it, like I can't get one over on you." Very nice moments. So they get Reed into the camp. There's a quick turn of events where they find the communicator. The prison guards have beaten the crap out of Mayweather, and they are turning the screws on Archer and Mayweather, basically saying, like, this is gonna get nasty now because you guys are clearly operating against what we're trying to do here. And when the prison break finally takes place, it includes some nice action sequences. I thought that were well rendered, with the shuttlecraft coming in. Again, I wish it hadn't been Trip flying it, but he comes in and he's strafing these weapons that are around the camp, large anti-aircraft weaponry, a guard tower, and then Reed is able to plant explosives inside the prison at a wall that gives them direct access with a quick run across a field to get to the hangar. And for me, the episode ending I thought was great. I thought, the escape it had elements of excitement. You had even the reluctant prisoner turning and saying, like, "Oh my God, I have to help my friend because his child is here," saying he's in danger. And so he runs down a hallway and he ends up getting involved, so that even, the reluctant gets to have a moment of being a hero. And rightfully, those in turn are getting out. They are escaping, and they get into their ships, and they all start to fly away. And for me, I was a little disappointed that the ending was they all fly away, and then they just fly away. It's just, it felt like a real sharp record scratch in that moment. And I would have appreciated if it had been a little bit more like why Archer wouldn't say, send out a message to all those ships, have them group up around us, and we will escort them out of this space. We will escort them to wherever their destination is. I would have appreciated them like putting their arm around them, because the Enterprise at that point had demonstrated the ships that go out to attack the Enterprise when the escape attempt starts are effectively like small scout vessels, and the Enterprise hits them with a couple of torpedoes and effectively swats them away. Yes. So the Enterprise staying in proximity with these escaping vessels would have made a lot of sense to me, especially since one of the Suliban, again, the one that they've been working with, Danik, the one who's most closely friendly with Archer, he names a specific system that they could try to make it to. So this is not just flying off into space, but they had a destination in mind of where we could go, where we could possibly be safe. It would have been nice if Archer had in that moment said, like, coordinate with us. We'll escort you out of here. If anybody tries to do anything, we'll be able to take care of it for you.
Well, the one thing I did like was that they didn't show which Suliban got out. Because we don't know if his friend got out. We don't know if that guy that ran back to help got out. Yeah. The two of them could have died. Like, we don't know who survived and who didn't. And then the gigantic question mark that's left is like when Mayweather says, "Do you think they'll make it?" And his response of, "Out of the system, yes, but beyond that, I don't know." Yeah. And it's like just left it with this gigantic like cloud hanging over the entire episode of, we did a good thing by freeing these people, but in freeing these people, they may all die because they may not have a shot here. And so it leaves that kind of ethical question mark over the entire episode, which I liked. But as you pointed out, it still needed some kind of resolution to the fact of like the captain saying, like what you're saying is broadcast a message, say that we'll take them to the Enterprise, we'll escort them out of the space, and then they can go where they want to go. It's like that would have just been a nice like little cherry on top without destroying the message of
I think you could have had both the ending that you've referred to, like having Mayweather still say that line of like, do you think they'll make it? And like, I don't know what the future holds for them, because clearly they are being hunted and blamed for the actions of a small group. And you could have still had that moment of like, but let us help them get at least away from this planet, at least away from these immediate pursuers that are going to be hot on their tail.
Yeah.
But overall, I rank this episode as head and shoulders above some of the recent ones we've dealt with. The episodes with the
handling better.
And like this, this for me is like, I'd put this in the top 3 or 4 of the season.
Yeah, me too. It's like the last few that we've reviewed were not good episodes.
Yeah.
Really at all. And this is the first good one we've had in a while. And I would rank it in probably the top 3 or 4 as well for the entire series so far.
So our listeners should let us know what they think. Did you appreciate this episode for the cultural moment that it was reflecting, both the World War II elements, but also the post 9/11 moments? Let us know what you think. You can leave a comment in the comment section below this video, or you can reach out through the contact information in the podcast description. Next time, Matt, we're going to be talking about Vox Sola. So what do you think's happening in that?
I think it sounds like a bubbly beverage, to be honest. Would you like a Vox Sola?
Yes. None refreshing. For me. I can't handle the bubbles. Yeah. Before we sign off, is there anything you'd like to remind our listeners about? What do you have going on your other channels?
Check out just my main channel, Undecided with Matt Farrell, where I'm talking about the latest sustainability technologies. I just interviewed a nuclear physicist about nuclear fusion and a recent breakthrough that really makes me feel like we are finally going to see fusion reactors in our lifetimes. It's cool stuff. So check it out.
That sounds completely made up.
I know. It sounds like Star Trek.
Sure. You've just talked to a nuclear scientist about fusion. Right. Okay. That sounds cool. As for me, you can check out my website, seanfarrell.com, and you can also just look for my books. If you don't want to bother going to a website, you can just go directly to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or drop by your bookstore and look for my books there. A reminder, you can visit trekintime.show and you can directly support the podcast there. If anybody has any comments or corrections, please do reach out. You can find the contact information in the podcast notes or just go to the comment section directly below the video. If you need to point out to us that actually wasn't the actor we thought it was, that was Norman Rockwell. That wasn't
Dean Stockwell.
Dean Stockwell. You guys don't know what you're talking about. That was the painter. Let us know. And please also remember to subscribe, to like the episode, and share it widely with friends and strangers, because after all, isn't that what Star Trek's about? Making friends?
Exploring.
And do come back next time. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Talk to you later.